To understand the scream, you first have to understand the silence. Not a literal silence. Wrestling arenas are rarely quiet, but a silence of spirit. The show had been running for 2 hours. The crowd in the arena was tired. You know that feeling when you are watching something out of habit rather than passion? That was the energy in the building. The air felt recycled. The matches were technically proficient. The moves were executed perfectly, but the soul was missing. The champion in the ring was speaking, holding a microphone that cost more than a car, reciting lines that felt like they were written by a committee in a boardroom 3 states away. The fans were polite. They clapped on cue. But their eyes were wandering. They were checking their phones, looking at the time, wondering if the traffic leaving the stadium would be bad. They were starving for a moment that felt real. In this world of scripted conflict, the audience becomes an expert lie detector. They can smell when someone is playing a role, and they can feel when someone is pouring their actual blood into the canvas. Tonight, it was all role play. It was safe. It was sanitized. There is a specific kind of tension that builds when a crowd is bored. It's a vacuum. It creates a space that begs to be filled. The producers backstage were looking at the monitors, sensing the lull. The commentators were trying to artificially inject excitement into their voices, but even they knew the night was flat. Nobody expected anything to change, expected the show to end, the lights too dim, and the status quo to remain exactly where it was. They didn't know that 10 feet behind the heavy velvet curtain, a ghost was waiting to walk out. Then, the lights cut. Not a fade to black, but a violent severance of power. The arena plunged into a darkness so total it felt heavy. For 3 seconds there was confusion. Was it a technical glitch? A power failure? Then the sound hit. It wasn't music at first. It was a distorted industrial screech that vibrated the floorboards under 20,000 seats. The giant screen flickered to life, not with a name, but with a color. A deep, bruising purple mixed with the harsh gray of static. And then she stepped out. The reaction wasn't a cheer. It was a primal, collective gasp that immediately morphed into a roar. Bullet looked closer at what they were screaming at. It wasn't just her face. It was the transformation. The last time they saw her, she was bright colors, smiles, and high fives. She was the hero who played by the rules. What stood on the stage now was a creature born from the ashes of that hero. Leather armor strapped tight across her chest, heavy and scarred. Chains hanging from her waist, clinking audibly even over the crowd noise. Her hair was different, wilder, darker, as if she had stopped caring about the vanity of the camera. Pyro blasted behind her, not in celebratory sparks, but in aggressive, thick columns of smoke. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She looked like a villain who had walked out of the smoke of a burning city. The security guards at the barricade actually took a step forward, instinctively sensing a threat. This wasn't a wrestling character returning to work. This was a woman who had returned to war. The sheer aesthetic shift told a story of pain, resentment, and power without a single word being spoken. The walk back through the curtain is the loneliest walk in sports. Out there, under the lights, you are a god. You command the emotions of thousands. But the second you cross the threshold into the backstage area, the illusion shatters. She walked through the curtain, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins like electricity. Her chest was heaving, pushing against the stiff leather armor. The chains rattled with every step, a constant reminder of the weight she was now carrying. Most people don't realize that backstage is a workplace. There are cables taped to the floor, catering staff pushing carts, and producers running with headsets. Usually, when a segment ends, there is applause from the other wrestlers, a good job or a handshake. Tonight there was only silence. She walked down the long concrete hallway. People stopped. They pressed their backs against the cinder block walls to let her pass. It wasn't out of respect, it was out of uncertainty. She had gone off script, not with her words, but with her presence. The intent of the segment was supposed to be a triumphant return, a happy-to-be-back moment. Instead, she had projected pure menace. She walked past the monitor position where the writers sat. They weren't typing. They were staring at the screens, watching the replays of fans in the front row, actually looking terrified. She didn't stop to explain herself. She didn't ask if it was okay. She kept walking, her eyes fixed on a point in the distance that only she could see. This is the danger of changing your skin. Even the people who employ you suddenly don't recognize who you are. In the locker room, the atmosphere was thick. The current champion, the one who had been standing in the ring when the lights went out, was watching the footage on a phone. There is a very real, very human jealousy that exists in this industry. Not about winning fake fights, it's about capturing real attention. The champion realized in that moment that her 6-month reign had just been overshadowed by a 3-minute entrance. The returned star sat on a bench in the corner, unlacing her heavy combat boots. Her hands were shaking, not from fear but from the crash of the dopamine spike. She looked at her reflection in the locker mirror. The dark makeup around her eyes was slightly smeared. She looked exhausted. This new look, the leather, the darkness, it wasn't just a costume, it was a shield. She had spent months at home, injured, watching the show go on without her. She had watched the fans move on to new favorites. She had felt the bitterness of being forgotten. Management was already pacing outside the door. They wanted to know the plan. They wanted to know if she was a bad guy now. They wanted to categorize her so they could sell merchandise. But she didn't want to talk to them yet. She needed to sit in the quiet aftermath of the explosion she had just caused. She traced a scar on her arm, a souvenir from the surgery that had kept her away. The fans screamed because they saw a cool new look. They didn't see the months of physical therapy, the depression, the doubt. They didn't see that the leather armor wasn't there to look tough. It was there to hold her together because she felt like she was falling apart. While the arena was emptying, the internet was burning. In the modern era, a wrestling return doesn't happen in a stadium. It happens on timelines. But within minutes, the image of her standing in the smoke was everywhere. It was the thumbnail on 100 videos. It was the wallpaper on thousands of phones. But what was fascinating was the conversation it sparked. Usually, fans argue about match quality or storylines. Tonight, they were analyzing psychology. "Look at her eyes," one comment read, gaining thousands of likes. "There is no light in them. She isn't playing." Another user pointed out the specific design of the chains, theorizing they represented the shackles of her past gimmick. The audience was doing the work for the writers. They were projecting their own desire for a darker, more mature story onto her. The phrase "she's BACK" was trending #1 globally. But it was accompanied by words like scary, different, and unhinged. The viral moment wasn't a high-flying move. It was a vibe. It was the aesthetic of a woman who had stopped trying to please everyone. This is the most potent drug in entertainment: mystery. For years, she had been accessible, posting selfies, replying to fans, being the girl next door. Now, her social media was black. No profile picture, no bio, no explanation. The contrast drove the engagement through the roof. The fans were screaming because for the first time in years, they didn't know what she was going to do next. The uncertainty was intoxicating. The media requests started piling up before she even left the building. Podcasts, morning shows, wrestling journalists. Everyone wanted the exclusive on the new look. Why the leather? Why the silence? Is she a villain? The public relations team was frantic. They had a schedule. They wanted to book her on the morning news to smile and wave and sell tickets for the next pay-per-view. She refused them all. This was the first major conflict of the night. She told the PR head that speaking now would ruin it. If she went on a talk show and laughed about the cool costume, the magic would die. She understood something the executives didn't. To maintain the aura of a dangerous outsider, you have to actually be an outsider. You have to be willing to say no to the machine that made you. So, she left the arena through a side exit, hoodie pulled up over her head. No autographs. No pictures with fans waiting by the parking lot gate. She drove into the night in silence. The radio was off. The media chaos was swirling behind her, a storm she had created and then walked away from. By refusing to speak, she made the fans speak for her. They filled the silence with their own theories, their own excitement. She was reclaiming her narrative by withholding it. In a world of oversharing, her refusal to explain the leather and the chains made her the most interesting person in the industry. She wasn't just a wrestler anymore. She was a riddle that everyone was desperate to solve. 3 days later, the adrenaline is gone, and only the work remains. The new look required a new style. You cannot wear heavy leather and chains and wrestle like a gymnast. It doesn't make sense. She was in a private gym miles away from the bright lights, reinventing her body mechanics. She had to slow down. The high-flying moves she used to do, the ones the kids loved, had to go. She replaced them with strikes. Brutal, efficient movements. She practiced throwing a punch not to look flashy, but to look like it hurt. She was analyzing tapes of old brawlers, studying how they moved with menace. It was physically exhausting in a different way. It wasn't cardio, it was impact. There is a loneliness to this kind of evolution. When you change your style, you alienate the people who liked the old you. She read the comments from parents saying, "My daughter used to look up to you. Now you look like a monster." Those words stung. She wasn't trying to be a monster. She was trying to be a survivor. But in the world of heroes and villains, nuance is often lost. She threw herself into the ropes, rebounding harder, hitting the canvas with a thud that echoed in the empty gym. Every bruise she developed during this training felt like a deposit paid toward this new character. The leather armor she wore on TV was heavy, but the expectation weighing on her shoulders was heavier. She had to prove that this wasn't just a costume change, that she had actually evolved. The hardest part wasn't the fans or the training, it was the family. She was on a video call with her parents. They were holding up a magazine that featured her new, dark look on the cover. Her mother looked concerned. "You look so angry," her mother said softly. "Are you okay? Is everything all right at work?" It is difficult to explain to people outside the business where the line is drawn. How do you explain that the anger is fake, but the source of it is real? How do you explain that you are channeling your actual frustrations into a fictional persona? She tried to smile, but it felt forced. She realized that the character was bleeding into her real life. She was becoming quieter, more guarded. She found herself wearing black clothes to the grocery store, avoiding eye contact. The look that made the fans scream was acting as a filter for her personal relationships. Friends stopped texting as much, intimidated by the intensity she was projecting. She was achieving the height of her career, the most buzz she had ever generated, but she felt more isolated than ever. This is the sacrifice of the artist. To make the audience feel something profound, you often have to go to a place that is uncomfortable. She hung up the phone and looked at the leather jacket hanging on the back of the door. It looked like a second skin, waiting to possess her again. She wasn't sure if she was wearing the armor, or if the armor was wearing her. It was time for the first match. The talking was over. The hype was peaking. She stood in the ring, the lights dim, facing her opponent, the cheerful, bright hero that reminded her so much of her past self. The bell rang.